Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. Regular listeners to this show, which has been going on for 8 years now, and massive archive at both prn.fm and at my own Technosis, techgnosis.com website. As you such listeners will know, I was gone last week, and I was at a festival in Hungary. Went with my wife Jennifer to the Ozora Festival, which probably has about, 15,000 people, 20,000, probably less than 20,000. Amazing festival. If you like the neo-tribal, psychedelic, electronic dance music, pagan global melting pot in nature festival. Highly recommend it. It's a beautiful place, great structures, very trippy environment, lots of very sweet people, and a lot of great music. And on top of all that, I was there to participate in a lecture series at the Chambuk House, which is the oldest structure on the land, a wonderful old farmhouse that they've converted into a great speaker environment. And it was a wonderful series. Hats off to the curators. Had a much higher level of sophistication, interest, and humor than a lot of psychedelic lecture series, or whatever you want to call them, that occur at a lot of these festivals. And the only problem, the only bummer, and it was a big bummer, with the Chambuk House series of lectures was the absence of someone who was supposed to be there, my friend Mitch Mignano, a.k.a. Raven, who I know not super well, but know him. I've always enjoyed running into him at Burning Man and various other oddball locations. And he was going to talk about Burning Man and the trickster archetype and comedy. And so I was really unhappy that he wasn't able to join us, because it was a really good crew of folks and he would have fit right in. But also because I was extremely interested in his topic. I wrote a piece about the Trickster at the Crossroads for Gnosis magazine in oh my God, 1995, some crazy thing. And I put it on the web, and it was, one of the first, I think, big, kind of interesting articles about the trickster in contemporary world and in the technological world in particular. And I think it's one of my probably most linked pieces, because it was online so early. So I'm definitely on the trickster side of the equation in terms of my dominant archetypes. I'm a big fan of, Raven, Coyote, Eshu, Legbara, Hermes, Thoth, and I'll even throw Ganesh in there. He's not quite a trickster, but he operates along similar channels and is also similarly identified with humor, or at least being in a good mood. And that was the other part that I wanted to hear Mitch talk about comedy, because even without thinking about his particular talk and what it might have been about, I thought more about comedy at the festival, or humor, really, and the incredible significance of humor within a spiritual / psychedelic / metaphysical worldview. And really sensing that while, people have thought a lot about comedy, people have thought a lot about humor, there's a lot of sort of canny wisdom about, one of the most important things in life is humor, and, it's a healthy thing to develop, although of course it can be cruel and sarcastic and isolating as well. I still feel that we are all wrestling with this topic, and really wrestling with how important humor is, particularly when we're pursuing higher sort of metaphysical or spiritual principles, and politics as well. What is the politics of humor? Is it Is it reactionary? Is it negative? Does it destroy the kind of camaraderie we need to face our battles, or is it actually a salve or an instrument of politics itself, a kind of sacred satire that can undermine the pretensions and the claims of power that are forced in our faces by the powers that be? Does it have an anti-authoritarian spark that can be relied on, or is it in fact a trickster and therefore can never exactly be relied on for anything? So hopefully some of these questions will come up in our conversation today with Mitch. So with no further ado, Mitch, welcome to Expanding Mind.
Hi there, Erik.
How's it going?
It's pretty good. So hopefully my phone, I thought we were doing a Skype sound check. So hopefully my phone connection is good enough, as I do live kind of in the middle of nowhere. So somebody has to let me know if for some reason you can't hear me very well.
Okay, I'll let you know. It's sounding okay right now. Definitely a phone line, but the words are coming through clear so far. So we'll just go with it as is. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not exactly sure to start because I read through your wonderful thesis that you did on Burning Man. Definitely one of the best pieces about Burning Man I've ever read, without any doubt. Partly because I agree with your interpretation of the event in many ways. I also really appreciate the particular history you tell about the event and why that particular history is important. And I'm referring here to the role of Cacophony and ultimately Gary Warren's and the Suicide Club in creating what Michael calls the social software of the event. And so while, many people associate Burning Man primarily with Larry Harvey, who's, of course, the guy who helps drag out the first man and burn him and became the kind of, Stetson-hatted figurehead and was often quoted as, his pronouncements on culture and creativity and community were the sort of official ideological material of Burning Man. The unofficial, and to my mind, much more important and much more interesting stream of ideas, concepts, practices, behaviors has to do with this kind of current of cacophony. So, I mean, I want to ask you about a lot of things about the Trickster beyond Burning Man. But since Burning Man is on the horizon, people are thinking about going, they're getting ready. Let's talk about the event for a little bit. And particularly, let's go over that history, especially for people who don't know it very much. Talk a little bit about why in your work on Burning Man, or what were the kinds of things you were trying to bring forward from its history, because it's such an ahistorical event in many ways. It allows us to escape history temporarily. But of course, the event itself has its own history, comes out of earlier currents that are very important to know. So talk a little bit about your research into the Cacophony Society and related San Francisco currents in terms of what sorts of ideas and practices and archetypes were operating there that help us understand, at least let's call it the classic phase of Burning Man.
Yeah, well, I think it was good the way that the research unfolded, because I didn't know that stuff going in. I was interested in Burning Man, and if it weren't for Larry Harvey's kind of like expansion and kind of keeping the thing going, I may never have gotten to go. My first year was 2004. And although generally I've been interested, or I had been interested in comedy up to that point, and both of my parents were kind of pranksters, it wasn't something I was looking to find when I was doing my research. I was interested in, I'd gotten all excited about these kind of esoteric ideas about an evolution of consciousness, Owen Barfield and Rudolf Steiner, Gebser, and Teilhard de Chardin, and then my thesis mentor, William Irwin Thompson. And I was working directly with him, although he was pretty hands-off. He was a thesis reader, so he was pretty hands-off. He would basically let me engage him in dialogue about concepts, but he didn't know what I was up to exactly. And he has his field actually is history. He has a PhD in history. And as I was trying to grapple with this question that many burners ask themselves, and you hear it talked about all the time in this most dilettante fashion, which is, what's happening? How are we evolving? We must be evolving, because it feels like this primordial force, and you're just kind of overwhelmed by it. Everybody at Burning Man gets in these little groups and talks about evolution as if they have any idea what evolution really is. So I try to take the question more seriously. And in order to do that, you have to really work with something like, what is the phenomenon? And in order to do that, you have to look at the history specifically. And I decided, it was just an instinct, but I just decided to avoid the organization for some reason and kind of and look for the rest of the history. I mean, I had a, you can kind of smell it that wasn't the whole story. Something was off about the website. At least 10 years ago when I wrote this, something was off about this story. And your experience, we burn an effigy, and that does kind of centralize the narrative for everybody. But it's not as if we're just a bunch of effigy burners and we're going out to do this, this thing that's bringing back some kind of like, old, like early modern European like practice or whatever. It's something else going on. And when I looked into it, I noticed one of the big things that most people don't realize is that the Burning Man, the first burn in the desert, is actually the fourth Cacophony Society zone trip. And that's important, and that's generally a surprise to most people. So, I mean, it's a zone trip that the Cacophony Society invited Larry Harvey to bring the man from Baker Beach out to, because that year, in 1990, he wasn't able to burn the man, because that Baker Beach burn that started in '86 and was growing each year had gotten to the point where the cops said, you can't burn that. It's 500 people or something like that. And he and this is part of his impulse, right? He had this more accommodating, cooperative sense about him. I didn't know him personally, actually, but it seems with his decisions, his organizational decisions and whatnot, he was okay with that and didn't burn the man. Whereas John Law and others in Cacophony Society were a little more. John Law had been in the Suicide Club, which we'll get into that, but a little more rambunctious, let's say, and probably would have just been like, screw it, burn it. So not being able to burn the man that year, and the Cacophony Society being well aware of it, because it was actually the Cacophony Society, as I understand it, that was helping manage the Baker Beach burns. They were the ones on walkie-talkies, kind of like patrolling the perimeter, and the ones who promoted it in their rough draft newsletter. Again, I wasn't there; it's a little before my time, but this is what I gathered from doing the research. And so, the Cacophony Society, you have to question then, well, what is a zone trip, and who are these guys? And that takes you another level deeper. The zone trip, a lot of people are familiar with the temporary autonomous zone concept from Hakim Bey, and we can get into that too. But what a lot of people aren't aware of is the Tarkovsky film Stalker, which is where this zone concept comes from. And it's, I don't know if you've seen, I assume you probably have seen it, right, Erik? Stalker, the Tarkovsky film?
Numerous times. Yeah, it's an interesting movie too. It's based on a Russian science fiction film or novel or novella that is itself a very interesting kind of exploration of what can be known and not known on the edges of things. But when you see the film, the sense of the zone, a place where another logic rules outside of the kind of mundane, gritty world that we share otherwise, is quite powerful. And it's one of the things that's great about it in the film is that it's neither positive or negative. It's not like a place where your dreams come true, although that's one of the stories that people tell about it, which is why people go there. But once you get there, it's much more confusing what's actually happening there, and it's kind of dark and strange, but it's not a horror thing at all. So it's a wonderful film for communicating the sense of enigma, of not knowing, in a way that is both scary and exhilarating, which is really appropriate for the kinds of trips they ended up doing. And then, of course, particularly Bad Day at Black Rock, which was their name for the zone trip, where they first went out to the playa and burnt the man.
Right, exactly. And those guys at the Weird Studies podcast have a great 2-part episode where they talk about Stalker for those who are interested in the movie. And you could also just watch the movie. So it's an inspiring concept, and this notion of trying to create a space that would evoke that experience had gotten into the minds of some of the Cacophony Society folks. And I think it was Kevin Evans, right, that went out to saw a wind sailing event in the Black Rock Desert and had recommended it to the others. And so they decided to have the Bad Day at Black Rock and invite Larry Harvey along. And the rest is history, And if anything, once there was problems in '96 with they didn't have roads, they didn't have an organized city, and people got run over in a tent, I think it was, and then it was a huge decision point. As far as I understand it, John Law didn't go back after that. John Law, Michael, and Larry Harvey, the ones that hold the trademark, and Michael still goes and is still active, and so that impulse, that more chaotic, destructive, for its own sake, in some sense, impulse has receded. And I think that the 2007, when the man was burnt by that fella during the lunar eclipse, I think that was a kind of rite of passage, because in a way it was Burning Man when they supported prosecuting him. It was Burning Man saying, we are not that. And that is something that they certainly were before 1996. It's hard for me to imagine somebody being prosecuted in 1995 for that. I mean, maybe you disagree, but
no, not at all. I think actually one of the things I admire about your kind of remarkable writing. I really hope that you get a version of this out into the world, because you go down many interesting pathways: art history, spirituality, anthroposophy. There's a lot of interesting things that we won't be getting to here. But you've also identified what I think is the proper way historiography to think about the event. That you have, 1990 to 1996, which is the Hellco year, where things got hairy, and there was a death before the event due to crazy, playing chicken essentially, and then there was running over 2 ravers in a tent. Didn't die, but they clearly, at that point, again, it was not a city. It didn't have road maps. It did not have a grid. It was like, if you look at the history of cities, you have villages, and before you have villages, you have these like kind of organic, weird mixtures of things, and that's how it was. And then it became organized, a structure imposed from above in order to produce the familiar crescent shape of the event. 97 doesn't really count because it's kind of off the playa. It's sort of an interim year, and then we initiate with 98, when they're back on the playa, a sort of run, that goes to 2007, which I think is in many ways as interesting as the first run, in some ways even more so because it's more complicated. Yep. But I also believe that the 2007, when Paul Lattis burnt the man on the Monday night under a lunar eclipse, was as significant a hinge point. And what it showed, again, was the organization's complete disavowal of their origins in chaos and their origins in the outside and in the dangerous aspects of the prankster. It was a very interesting event to be at in 2007. For me, it was the quote unquote last year, although I think I came 1 or 2 times since then. But I haven't been for 8 years, partly because of this phase, which I find is the least interesting phase of the event, although more symptomatic of the rest of the problems of reality and therefore less of a good escape. even if you're approaching it just as an escapist event. I was very surprised even at that event, and I'll just mention a couple of things during the Paul Addis event. One of my surprises was the way in which the organization reacted. I understood the way that they felt threatened by it. I understood the fact that they felt people were not only were people, they talked about people being in danger. I think more important was that, the hundreds of human hours of work that went into it were considered to have been wasted or destroyed by this chaotic act, and that it was in order to sort of respect the kind of brand or respect the work that people had done, they needed to basically do it again. So they rebuilt the man and then burned on the normal period of time. What surprised me is that they had a golden opportunity to invite the community into that process, to have a gathering of the tribes, to have a crazy, huge, anarchic meeting where people spoke their minds, or where people were invited to help with the physical work of putting the man back together. We were there. We had to rebuild the man. Everybody there had to rebuild the man if that was what the goal was. But they didn't. They kept it completely within the organizational structure, the power hierarchy, blah, blah, blah. It was the same old crappy story. So that was very disappointing about the organization, which for me was like a bifurcation point. I am no longer really interested in the political potential of this organization. It is just like another organization. Whatever. I mean, it's fine. It's good. I'm glad it's there. I don't want it to stop. But it's just it became less interesting for me. And then the other thing, and then I'll shut up, was, and much more surprising and disturbing and sad, was the enormous number, the high percentage of people in the many conversations that happened that week who were adamantly against Paul Addis. This blew my, fucking mind. Because for me, as someone who went to the event in 1994 and so had 3 years of the OG chaos, that Monday night, whatever else you want to say about law and danger and liability and the police and all the stuff you want to say, whatever else you want to say, that guy brought the old chaos back, and we felt it. And the people I knew who were on my wavelength were all like, yeah, that was fucked up, but man, what an amazing, the most Burning Man act ever, the highest poetic terrorism I've ever seen in my life. But the vast majority of people that I spoke to were clearly and adamantly opposed to that action. And that was the point where I went, that prankster filter that I saw this through, the one that you articulate so well and that we're going to talk more about, it's not only minor, it's almost gone.
Almost gone, yeah.
Anyway, that was my kind of reaction to that, and I appreciate you drawing attention to that. But let's go into more of what this prankster spirit was about. We've talked about Cacophony Society, but you went deeper and did more work than I've read about the importance of this guy, Gary Warner, who, wasn't it Warner? Warren, how do you pronounce it?
Warren.
Yeah, who started the Suicide Club, which is what, inspired the Cacophony Society. So talk about this guy, because he's a really important figure and not very well known.
Yeah, I was surprised. At the significance of this when I was doing the research, and a lot of material we didn't have that book, The Tales of the San Francisco Cacophony Society, a beautiful book that's been published since that would have been, I mean, in a way, maybe it's a good thing, because maybe the research path was a little different. But Gary Warren had a bookstore called Circus for the Soul in San Francisco in the late 70s, and had started a practical jokes class at I think it was SF State Communiversity. Is that right? Where you could kind of just create your own class. So I haven't looked at this exact thing.
No, you're on it.
Yeah. So, and created this practical jokes class, but then got kicked out, because it was prankstery, and just started having meetings at his bookstore. And at some point, these practical jokes, which I think it's important to understand that this kind of clowning circus of the soul kind of trickster ethos was just, was a pervasive environment for him, because at some point there's a turn taken towards something more initiatic, which is confronting, doing something actually dangerous and confronting your fears, and potentially transcending from there. I mean, I don't know that they looked at it explicitly like that. The only person I've talked to from then was Barlow, which was really wonderful to have him verify a lot of the research. But the Suicide Club. I'll read this description. The charter member meeting of the SF Suicide Club. Meeting regularly, but at odd times, members must agree to set their worldly affairs in order to enter the capital real world of chaos, cacophony, and dark saturnalia. And they must further agree to live each day as if it were their last, for it may be capital. The club will explore the untraveled, exotic, miasmal, and exhilarating experiences of life. Deserted cemeteries, storms, caving, haunted houses, Nazi bars, fanatical movements, stunts, exposés, impersonation. The club will be ongoing for the rest of our lives. And just from that, you can see that element that we talked about being officially gone by 2007 is right at the very front. But it's also something that you have to agree to enter into. We're not talking about inviting somebody to a party without it's like a disclaimer. You're going to be a part of taking that risk, and you kind of agree. And I think that's important. I mean, what is the Burning Man ticket does say something on it about risk, but clearly they're more concerned with liability nowadays than they were. And they did creative and dangerous things like climbing the Golden Gate Bridge or the Bay Bridge at night. And I don't know if they were probably worse sober. I mean, that's pretty hard and dangerous. I haven't done it myself. I have spoken to people who have. I won't mention the names. But they would come up with these. They had rules for this as well, because you had to be safe, and you had to also respect another person's fears. And I thought that was interesting, that there were kind of rules against sadism, because when you get into really trying to understand comedy and the trickster, you see very clearly that there are these shadow tendencies towards nihilism, and towards sadism, and it's very rare that you find a balanced, really balanced kind of trickster person. Oftentimes they're really self-destructive. Self-deprecating is just like one layer, but actually self-destructive, actually nihilistic. Some of the people I meet that I'm so fascinated by, because they're clearly gifted potential Heyoka shamans if they were in a different life and had a different context, are horribly self-destructive and really can be sadistic. But anyway, maybe we'll get into that in a bit. But the Gary Warren Suicide Club had begun to. This is the late 70s too. This is a San Francisco parallel to the emergence of hip hop culture in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, which I find interesting, because this sort of reimagination of the urban landscape through creativity is I think an impulse that transcends both cultures, and I think there's an important link there. But after one of the Golden Gate climbs, Gary Warren had an epiphany, and he got home and wrote a document that he called Carnival Cosmology. And it's for this reason. It's because of this document that I began to see him as kind of like a godfather of Burning Man. And I had been studying Gebser. A lot of people probably don't know who Gebser is, but it's kind of like an evolutionary, almost like an evolutionary anthropologist in a way. And I had been familiar with his way of thinking, where, for example, he talks about the evolution of consciousness, and he gives an example of the introduction of the notion of landscape into human consciousness and perception, with Petrarch's ascent of Mount Ventoux, and how for the first time, landscape is visualized the way that we understand it now, and the way that it was painted by the Romantics. Well, I had structures like that in my mind. So when I read Gary Warren's Carnival Cosmology, and I thought about my own, because 2007 was the year I did data collection, and that was that year of the weird, ideological, ecological World's Fair that I thought was more of an ideology than anything else. But when you're at the Mand, at the center, looking out on the Esplanade, if you kind of just phenomenologically, you see this chaotic, swirling urban environment. There's just a specific thing about it that I've never experienced anywhere else. And let me just read you what Gary Warren says from there. Okay, so this is just an excerpt from his Carnival Cosmology. The world is a midway. Cities are its sideshows. The only difference between children and adults is that there is no one to take care of us. When we left home, it meant we were lost on the midway. And unlike God, the carny boss will only let us ride as long as we pay. No one will come to find us. Some children will hurt us. Others will stop to play. Some are still deciding. But you can sneak in, too. And it's just really intense because it's so perfect to me. Hold on. Let me just continue on. Try to get between the exposition and just the source here. Later, he says, now I find fear only a final, non-evolving image that stills other possibilities, the creation of more intoxicating future images that prevents me from entering into a visionary dialogue with who I could become. And then he goes on, the world is becoming a total play environment, and I am becoming something else entirely. The future is no longer on a circuit like the news, entertainment something an entrepreneur plans as I expectantly read the notices in the bleached parchments on the corner stands. It is an imagination away. Now, this is like 1978, and we think of first Burning Man in the Desert as 1990. But when we understand that John Law was 18 when he joined the Suicide Club, and basically must have been mentored by Gary Warren on some level, and then he took that impulse into the Cacophony Society, which was a much more open, much less initiatic in that sense of trying to do something really dangerous and do the work on your kind of alchemical work on your individual body in order to be able to open your imagination past fear images that are still in your imagination. Then you can see that even though Michael and John Law might not have in any way consciously been like, yeah, Gary Warren's Carnival Cosmology is the shit, we're going to recreate that in the desert. Somehow it seems to have unfolded such that there's a democratization of that kind of experience. I mean, that certainly describes my experience when I go out there and I'm in the middle and looking out in the city.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just going to chime in here. I mean, that was a revelation for me. You're pointing out to that piece, which is also available, I think, slightly edited online at the Burning Man website. So anyone can go and check it out, and it's really worthwhile tracking this fascinating undersung man. Clearly, brilliant, and we can talk about that partly. I think particularly in relationship to one's own fears. There's something about combining the trickster prankster energy, which, as you said, tends towards nihilism, tends towards a certain kind of superficiality, can tend towards sadism, towards hurting other people, towards power games with other people. I mean, the whole concept of the prankster is a very, morally ambivalent one in mythology as well as in reality. But by turning those energies or including within that practice the confrontation with fear, which means directly the confrontation with death, i.e. like the fundamental terrifying image that structures our personality and behavior, Gary was able to articulate a way of using the trickster current, the prankster current, the mindfuck current, in a way that is initiatory and liberational. So I mean, it's a remarkable connection. But I just wanted to chime in here that I only wrote one big piece about Burning Man. I wrote some journalism as well, which I'm proud of. The first piece was in 1995, so it was super early, and it was really fun to research and fun to write. But my more substantial piece was about the cults of Burning Man, about the different sort of orientations that had a kind of spiritual or religious dimension to them, even if they often looked like the opposite. But within that process, I was trying to articulate aspects of the experience of the place, and I kept falling back on the metaphor of the cosmic carnival, which to me is also a kind of fundamental psychedelic archetype. You get to this place where it's all just a show, and it's like we keep paying our money to go on the ride, but the ride ends and we're stuck there, and the carny is laughing, and it's kind of celebratory and somewhat demonic at the same time. But it also, I think, is a space of, it tells us something about the imagination. Like the sideshow is, it's very much about, what do you imagine the bearded lady is going to be? What do you imagine this horrible monster or this sort of sexualized mutant or monster, what's it going to be? It's what's behind the curtain. And then the part of that process is some kind of sacrifice, money or something, your dignity, whatever. And then you go in and you have your moment of revelation, but the moment of revelation is always mixed with disenchantment. And this to me is part of the deeper spiritual logic of the trickster, is not just that it undermines the seriousness of the endeavor, whether it's spiritual or whatever, that it's laughing as opposed to acting sober, or that it's undermining hierarchy or undermining power. Those are all very significant events. But I think there's a deeper significance that we don't talk about as much, which is that the trickster enchants by disenchanting, by pulling the rug out from under the thing that you thought was actually special. And in that moment, that flash, that collapse, there's a deeper spiritual possibility or ontological possibility or even political possibility in that gesture. And so there's something about the way, in my metaphor with Burning Man, it's the way that, like, oh, look at that thing in the distance. What is it? It's a fairy castle. No. It's a magical whale. No. It's Aladdin's cave, and all these images and associations as you step towards this marvelous, flickering, multicolored space that's asking to open up like an incredible landscape just around the corner. And then as you walk closer, you realize it's some LEDs and some 2x4s and a plastic bag, and there's a bunch of junk there, and it's just kind of creaking in the wind mindlessly. And that moment that's the moment, and it's not like, oh, now we got to go find another distraction. I mean, that ends up what we end up doing most of the time anyway, because it's life. But that staging of the collapse, I think, is part of the deeper and in some ways more serious wisdom of this archetype.
Well, yeah, it's because it's. I mean, if taken the right way, it's got an existential kind of grounding, like you're talking about. I mean, somebody reacts and becomes disenchanted when they see the LEDs and then moves on. That's one thing. But if you then realize how powerful your imagination is and how you're in many ways can participate and be the author of a co-creative reality with the world that you're interacting with, then that's extremely empowering. And Burning Man, I think, offers that opportunity. It's funny you brought that up because the version of the MS I sent you is, I guess, the one I had to turn in. But as anybody that's written anything of any length knows, things go through all kinds of iterations, and I vaguely remembered that a previous version, because I don't know if I referenced you in that at all, but in my in the original one, my chapter 1, there's a whole bit here about your beyond belief. That's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah.
Your article. And you talk about the evasion. Yeah, beyond belief, the cult of Burning Man. You say Black Rock cliche has it. You can't say anything very penetrating about Burning Man because its diversity and contradictions undermine any generalization you might be tempted to make. The truism is solid enough and should be mulled over by any burner foolish enough like me to venture into the written analysis of the yearly festival. Yet behind this notion of impossible generalizations lurks a higher and more important injunction to keep the event free from the prison of interpretation, explanation, and the insidious net of meaning. The refusal is a prophylactic. By setting our bullshit detectors on high alert, burners ward off pretension, self-consciousness, and all the prepackaged experience, etc. And I quoted that at length in this version because it was a good segue into this idea that I was working with about Burning Man's acting like a satire on basically your life, your own personal narrative. And I follow it up, and I start getting into Comedy Central, and how the Daily Show would satirize Fox News and all this, and then I say that humor provides a gauntlet of contradictions and humility that can serve to create a space which new and complex phenomena can emerge without suffering the gravitational death of deficient categorization. And this is a powerful thing. And you mentioned at the beginning that people know that laughter is important and that humor is important. And yet when you look at, if you try to do a literature review on it, you really can't find that much. I mean, on one hand, taking humor seriously kind of like defeats the purpose, some people will say, or like you shouldn't do that, like it's taboo or something. And then you'll find there's a few things that you can find, but basically there's a resistance. It has like its own resistance to being studied in that way analytically. And yet I think there's a lot that we can understand. And for me, one of the most powerful things was the experience of coming into contact with Heyoka at a Sundance ceremony that I got invited to. And there you see what I take to be kind of like an anthropologically balanced function of this trickster impulse, like embodied, like in an actual communal setting, in a ritual setting, and in a daily setting. Really, it was strange. After I finished the grad school, I went back. I had quit gambling, counting cards, and playing poker, because I grew up exposed to that culture through my uncle, who's a professional poker player and card counter. And I had done it a little bit to make money and preserve my freedom outside of a system. But when I started studying Rudolf Steiner, I thought maybe this is like not part of the path, you know? And then I ended up going to school and studying Steiner more deeply and then getting into this trickster idea. And then I realized, well, it's part of my path. You know, I should try to understand it as much as possible. And I went back and I did it enough to get a sense of what it was like to embody that archetype in our context, in our very like capitalist leisure entertainment culture context in Las Vegas, which is kind of the antithesis of Burning Man because it looks the same on the outside, except that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and Burning Man is all about like, how do we take this home with us or whatever. But anyway, I was finishing up a trip, and a friend of ours that we used to get free huge, wonderful dinners. And I had a friend from Houston that was involved in the Lakota culture in Las Vegas and doing sweat lodges. And he gradually worked his way up to being asked to Sundance as a white guy. And so I invited him to dinner, and I was just finishing up a trip, and he was like, yeah, man, I'm going to Sundance like in a reservation on the border of New Mexico and Arizona. He said, you should just come with me, jump in the car and come with me. I didn't know anything about it, to be honest with you, but I'm interested in culture. And I had all these, you have to burn up your comps at the end. So it was ridiculous because I had like $800 worth of chocolate from some European chocolatier that was at some big casino in Vegas, and I had a chocolate and then maybe some really expensive wine. I just threw it in the car and I went with him. And I didn't realize that apparently he was running late, and I didn't realize that I was going to be able to talk to him because he was sundancing, and I didn't know anybody else. And it was about an hour and a half off of any highway. It was out there. I mean, if you get hurt, you're hurt. Like you're kind of screwed. And and we had no time to get food or anything, so we had set up a tent, and then he was gone, and he was gone for four days, and I was just kind of stuck there. And he said, "Don't you'll figure it out. You'll just somebody will help you out." So there's all these bone whistles and there's drums and everything. And the first person I run into, it turns out I found out later was the Heyoka, the sacred clown, and he's just like a normal guy, And I ended up having several experiences with him in particular that gave me a real concrete image of what somebody with this impulse could look like in a community and in a benefic way, in my opinion, anyway. And it's not. And so, okay, well, let me give you an example. So the first thing is he just kind of he could see that I didn't know anybody, didn't have anything, and he took me to meet the chief's grandmother and help her with the kitchen. But on the way there was very few white people there. I think there was another anthropologist, and maybe this was his wife or something, but there was a white woman that came up and said she knew his name, and she's like, "Oh, we're so excited about the ceremony, getting really good energy out here this year," and she was just happy and excited. And his response, I wish I could remember it exactly. I know at first he said, "I don't like what you're saying," and then he said something that was completely unintelligible. It wasn't even really an allegory, but he said something like, it was like, the bear doesn't sit by the trash when the crow flies to the left. But it wasn't even that like allegorical. It was just like nonsense, and it was very negative in aspect. And it left her like with this, and me, and with this feeling of like, oh, that's terrible. It was so rude. And he just turned and walked off. And I mean, looking back on it, my take is that her kind of like optimism and her like good vibe, like sense was something that's actually kind of biased and out of balance, really. I mean, this is a sacred ceremony, and it's not like maybe it's not the best thing to approach it with this, yeah, everything's great, and getting like she's at like a festival in LA or something. Anyway, then I saw, I know we don't have time for me to explain what a Sundance is. Hopefully some people will, people should at least understand that it's a very sacred tradition, and it's a very powerful ceremony that involves an arbor and sun dancers making fasting and dancing in a circle of the four, praying to the four directions, and doing something called piercing. I won't want to get into that. I also kind of want to respect their privacy with that. I'm not sure what the etiquette is there, but it's really powerful, and I was really lucky to be there. And there are rules, right? There's an eastern gate to the arbor, and we went and cut down, all the men that were there that were capable went and cut down a cedar tree that the chief had picked out, and then we put that into the center of the arbor, like it's like a navel, and the sun rises on the eastern gate, and you're not allowed to cross the eastern gate in that direction around the circle, and then the dancers all go in one direction clockwise. But the Heyokas, there was two. There's one that I had a lot of contact with, but there was two. And at one point, they're out there like on the second or third day, and these people have been fasting. They're not drinking water. It's solstice, by the way. I mean, this is like June in Arizona, New Mexico, and they're out there dancing. And I look and I see these guys in robes, black robes, like almost like weird, like KKK kind of robes, and they have fishing poles, and they had $100 bills tied to the end of the fishing poles, and they can go whichever direction they want. They can go counterclockwise, and that's interesting because it reveals the game that is our unconscious kind of patterning of the symbol world of the culture that we live in, and that's really important. I think it's an important part of it. And here they are. They got fishing poles with $100 bills, and they're just like fishing in front of these dancers who are trying not to be distracted by that. And that's an important thing as well, I think, that the signal to noise ratio. I mean, some people, what I found is when I'm irreverent with people, I think any really legitimate good artist or philosophic, like honest thinking person that's really on a path, is they may not be trickster like themselves. They may not even like it. But you'll notice that if you try to kind of throw them off a little bit and keep things balanced in conversation, they'll handle it well. They'll field the noise in a balanced manner, because they have a discipline of conversation and attention. They don't get distracted by it. Their ego doesn't need to fix it. They can just roll with it. It's like improvising on a musical instrument. Like a conversation should be like that as well when it's on a higher level. It's like channeling, really. And anyway, that is another example. And then I got to do Sweat Lodge with the Heyoka. That was really fucking fascinating because, in a Sweat Lodge, you're in there and you're trying to pretend like you don't want to get out of the building or whatever you call it, and you go around and people say prayers, and there was this same guy. He just starts going off. Oh man, he's like, it's hot in here. It's so hot in here, isn't it hot in here? And like of course it is hot in here, but you're like, what is this guy doing? Like, is he for real? And I mean, I kind of was onto him, but he just starts making a big deal, and he's interrupting the person who's leading the circle. He's singing songs and he prayers, and then he's like, no, I can't take it. It's like, somebody's got to get me some water. Somebody get me some water. So somebody goes, gets him water, comes back, hands him the water, and he immediately throws the water on the stones, right? which obviously makes it hotter, brings steam and makes it hotter. And the gesture of how he did that, how he went from being this jackass, like class clown, like totally full of shit, like and then throwing the water onto the stone, he collapsed into this sacred, like very focused attention, just looking at the stones. In that moment, I'll never forget that gesture of that collapse, because it was shocking. That he would do that things could be not what they're, what he says they are. And clearly, he's bringing out this unconscious thing, which is another function, I think, is this, you pull out these unconscious thoughts and feelings that need a voice. They need a voice and to be heard. And then, so the last thing is that we went around in the circle and people said their prayers, and they're just, I mean, there was a white person in there too. And it's sometimes it's funny, at these kind of things when people are like, I mean, there's reverence, and then there's like almost like too much reverence. And people are trying their darnest to be like sacred, because they're not really used to it, and they're in somebody else's house. And then it gets to him, and he's just like, Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb, and he sings the rest of the chorus. And I was like, that's it, I got it. All right, like I know how it works now. And honestly, since then, I started to look at comedy, like comedians, and how, like, where is that impulse? Because we have it; it's all over the place at class clowns, and then I find it at parties and festivals. I find people that have that gift and just have not disciplined themselves, or that want to, or don't understand themselves that way, or then they have this like nihilism. And I try to communicate with them, tell them what I know about what I've seen, and then the thing is, the entertainment industry, because I also was exposed to the comedy scene in New York, the Upright Citizens Brigade, like 20 years ago. And they have a long-form improv technique. It's really fascinating how it works. And the thing is, most people in comedy get drawn to it, and then they end up in this really insular, like aesthetically unappealing kind of like bubble, which sucks, because I love funny theatrical people. Like, I really just wish I was around them all the time. But then they go to LA, and then they're on, you get like a part on this show and a part on this show. And it's just the entertainment industry is appropriating these would-be kind of like shamanically powerful individuals from just living a life that they would live in their community and with their families and with their friends, and perhaps finding that potential in other ways. That said, there is a function of it on the level of mass media. People like Ali G. With Sacha Baron Cohen, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and that's a hugely important thing. We don't have time to get into.
No, we don't have time. In fact, we actually only have about a minute left, so we don't have to really talk about, because everybody has a concept about entertainment and comedy and blah, blah, blah. Really what you're drawing attention to is something I think we don't pay attention to, which is the function of comedy in our ordinary lives and the particularly funny people. And I think it's really important. The more spiritual you are, the more earnest you are about your path, the more you want to get down to brass tacks, whether that's, being politically clear and authentic in your gestures, in your action in the world is important, or what we do, all of that kind of sense of seriousness. The more that you're like that, the more you got to make sure you're around people like this. If you're not one of those people, you still can cultivate your own humor. It gets you through dark times better than about anything. I had a hellish day of traveling yesterday, and I'm actually maintained an amused attitude through almost the entire thing through, I don't know, doing this kind of work. But more importantly is be aware of having people like that in your life, and supporting them. We just have time for one little comment from you, just like half 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I found a community here in Santa Fe. I still travel a lot, but I've been back and forth between Brooklyn or in New York and Santa Fe. But I got to kind of experiment with that myself, and it only worked when I found a home where people take it the right way. We'll go out. We have a teepee up in the woods in the Jemez Forest, and go out there and we'll take trips. And I just get to kind of get into that role. And it helps balance everything. But the thing is, you got to accept it. Like a comedian likes being called out and kind of embarrassed in a way. But a lot of people, it makes them really uncomfortable, and they project things onto you. So I think it's important, exactly like you said, kind of keep that in your life, find it, and keep it close. It's really healthy.
Well, I just want to say thanks so much, Mitch, for a.k.a. Raven, for joining us on Expanding Mind. It was a really illuminating talk.
Thank you, Erik.
All right, until next week, folks, keep your minds open.